in a way, Milton Friedman was about first principles about how commerce works. And economics has become very much interested in the fine details of things. And so it becomes very difficult for us to communicate to the average person about what is important about what we're doing because we haven't really thought it through coherently about what our first principles are.
This is Viewpoints, a deeper look into the ideas that shape our politics and culture. Break free from the orthodoxies of mainstream media and hear diverse perspectives from interesting people across the political spectrum. Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Sean Rasmussen. The chattering classes have embraced a fairly anti-Western and anti-market stance over the past decade, particularly in the fields of education and media. It's just not fashionable to appreciate the achievements of Western liberalism and free markets these days. But in order to expand human flourishing, it's crucial that we understand what has worked and why, so as to not throw the baby out with the bathwater as we work to deconstruct our societies. Today's guest can help with this. He has spent his career investigating the fundamentals of human cooperation. Bart Wilson is professor of economics and law at Chapman University and director of the Smith Institute for Political Economy and Philosophy. His most recent book is Meaningful Economics, Making the Science of Prosperity More Human. Bart Wilson, welcome to Viewpoints.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to know what you thought about my opener there in terms of characterizing a lot of what's going on in elite institutions right now.
Well, it's easy to get preoccupied with all the things that we need to improve about our social, moral, and political lives. But in doing so, we seem to overlook just the incredible time this is to be alive and to be human beings on this planet. And so we've achieved a lot and made our lives more comfortable. We've made our lives more healthy, and we're living longer lives, and we are flourishing in a way that the human species has not flourished in over 200 years ago. And so there's a lot to be very reflective about in terms of how well we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really like about your work. I heard you talk on a different show, and I really liked what you had to say. And the piece you did about property blew my mind. We're going to get to that eventually. But I thought maybe we could start with something you're known for, which is experimental economics. Can you talk a bit about what that is and what got you interested in that?
So experimental economics is the laboratory method of inquiry where we design models of how we think economics works, and then we pay undergraduates based upon the rules and incentives that we create to do what they think is in their best interest in this exercise. For me, mostly that involves building kind of virtual worlds, kind of miniature versions of different parts of economics, and I want to see what people do with them. I spend a lot of time working on how property comes about, when it does come about, how it doesn't come about, what are the rules behind it, and how it works. And it's really up to the participants to do what is in their interest. And most of the time, I'm learning how little I truly know about why people do what they do.
That's fascinating. I know that you've done studies on things like policing theft, building trust, and rejecting unfair deals. Can you tell me about one of those studies?
Oh, sure. So there's a very basic game in economics called the trust game, where you ask one person to decide how much of their money would they like to invest in a second person that they're paired with. And so they both could just end the game with $10, or the first mover could say, no, I'm going to take my $10, invest it in the second person. And the experimenter triples that 10 into $30 by the time it arrives to the second person. And then the second person has to decide how much money, if any, to give back to the first person and how much to give to themselves.
Okay.
And so if the first person takes it all, then the second person goes home with $40 and the first person goes home with nothing. Or the second person could decide, let me take that $30 and split it equally. In which case he gives $15 back to the first mover and adds 15 to his $10, and now he has 25. And so if you trust and invest that $10 in the second mover, both people are made better off when the second mover returns some of that money back to the first mover. But economics has this basic model of kind of predicting based upon your material self-interest, what are you going to do? And so that means if there's any money transferred to the second mover, they're going to take it all, which case the first mover says, I'm not going to send you any money. And everybody goes home with $10. And that's not what happens. And this is kind of a shock to economists. Like, why are that people not behaving this way? To ordinary people, this seems pretty natural to help somebody else. And then when they've trusted you and invested something in you, that you give something back to them for doing so, for giving you that opportunity to be better off. And so the question is, why does that happen? And we try to run different treatments and conditions to understand what's going on. How does that basic principle work? It was a model that kind of shook economists a little bit and got surprised by how regularly people trust, which is usually about half of the people. And then 2/3 of the second movers respond by giving money back to the first mover. So 2/3 of them do it. Now, it's not everyone. 1/3 take the money and run.
Okay.
But these are anonymous, and they're done through a computer terminal. And so you don't know any names, no faces, and still one half trust people and 2/3 reciprocate that trust, which is pretty high and also fairly robust. I've been running versions of the experiment, and other people have started running it before me. And like over 20 years, those ratios of half sending and 2/3 reciprocating is pretty robust.
Interesting. And I guess that works for other things too, like policing theft and unfair deals.
Yes. So the policing theft was an interesting problem. So when police come across resources that have been used in a crime in different states, depending on the rules, you can just confiscate that money and then put it towards your policing resources. Okay. So a lot of police departments love that because this is a way to fund them very extravagant and get all the best new toys to go out and policing. But it puts these police officers in a bad situation where they have to decide, do I take this money or do I let the people who are involved with what they're doing get to keep it? And so when it's posed as you or me, they're going to go for themselves. And that means make their police departments better off. And so my experiment was designed to see will people do that? And let's change the rules where they don't get to keep this money. What happens? And when they don't have those rules, they will gladly help other people out. They'll help all the people they're running policing out because there's nothing in it for them. But when they have the power, you give them that power to confiscate other people's resources, they're going to use it because they've been incentivized to choose themselves or somebody else. And so that kind of tension is it's important. So people will act in their own interest. The question is, do we want to put people in that position, like particularly people with policing powers, to be to benefit themselves, or most people, if there's no way to enrich themselves at the expense of other people, are going to be very sociable and help other people out.
Okay, interesting. And that tells you a lot about how you might want to structure some of those institutions.
Yes, so if you give people power to confiscate stuff, they will do it. And so it's an example of having a bad rule in the situation of policing, which is about basically who gets these resources. Do the police department get them, or do we let the people get to keep them?
Okay. In that case, so like if you're saying like if a cop pulls over someone doing a crime or something, and they've got some money there in the car or something like that, is that what you're talking about?
If it's part of what they're being investigated for, being illegal, yes, then they can confiscate the resources in some states. Okay. So generally, this is in the context of drug enforcement.
Okay.
So it's part of the crime that you have the money, and so therefore that can be confiscated while you're being charged with the crime. And so it's whether or not the money is part of what you're doing, and then who gets to benefit from that.
Okay. And how would you get around that? Just by saying, okay, when you confiscate this illegal money, you just put it to charity or something? Or how would you get around that?
Well, so the question is whether or not the police departments themselves get to keep this for their own resources. Okay, yeah.
Hmm.
And so, yes, the state can keep it and use it for things, but the question is, does it directly go into the revenue of the police department? So
Okay, so
that
that's
means
what makes the difference.
yes,
Okay.
every single. So that's why we have this kind of run where you get the police officers have the fanciest cars and the souped up vans, and the SWAT teams are all really highly decked out, and because they had a lot of money from these things. And maybe that's, second thought. So yeah, it's whether or not the money directly can go to the police departments themselves. And it creates problems if a police department is dependent on that money. So now when they pull people over, like, oh, we need some more money for what we're doing. Let me see if I can find some reason to, create a crime, investigate a crime here and confiscate the resource.
Huh, interesting. I know that in your experiments, you've observed that people form norms and moral boundaries spontaneously in a way. Like these things just kind of emerge. Can you explain a little bit about that and what that tells us about human nature?
So one project that's kind of directly on this seems a little obscure, but a law professor, Robert Ellickson at Yale, was interested in how is it that whalers solve their problems of who gets the whale when they're out in the open seas, because there's no government out there. There's no one to enforce this, but somehow it's just not a free for all out there. They have some set of rules for this. And so what he observed was that when the prey were right whales off in the North Atlantic, they're called right whales because they're the right whale to hunt. That is, they're baleen, so they don't have teeth. When they die, they don't sink. They don't fight very hard, and there are big pods of them, and so they're just the ones to go after. And so the rule that he noticed was that if the harpoon was in the whale and attached to your boat, it was called iron holds the whale. As long as your harpoon was in the whale and attached to your boat, it's yours. You can hold it.
Okay.
No one else will go after that whale. But if it got away, or you're a little bit inept, you had a bad luck that day, and it was open for anyone else to go after. So it was fast. Held fast, it's yours. Loose, somebody else's. But when the whaling moved off the coast of North America and the prey were sperm whales, now they have teeth. They're going to dive. And so you had to attach a drogue, some buoyancy to your harpoon, and you didn't want to attach to your boat, and then you had to be in pursuit. So as long as you're in pursuit of your whale, it was called iron holds the whale, then that it was your whale and no one else would go after it. And so they have different rules based upon the prey and the circumstances and the context that they implemented to decide who gets what whale. This law professor was noticing he's just looking through history. And so it's kind of an ex post rationalization of why you see what's going on here. And I thought that's what an experiment's for. I can ex ante design a world where there are right whales and sperm whales, and I can ask my undergraduates to go out there looking for them and seeing do they come up with any rules? And if they do, what kind of rules do they come up with?
Okay.
And so it was fast fish, loose fish is pretty intuitive, that it's mine and kind of as long as I'm attached to it. And we found that if people wanted to find a resolution to this conflict, they found those rules.
Okay.
What I didn't find was the second rule. And that kind of forced me to learn a few things that maybe I could have implemented some other features of the world into the experiment because they were missing. But what was really interesting is the conversations that they had about what rule, because literally two people could be saying, I think the rule should be the first one, whoever attaches to it gets it. And the other one would say, no, I'm the one chasing it. That's the way the rule should be. And so they have to work those things out. And what that means is it's conditional on those local circumstances. It's kind of conditional on what group of people are you in. It's also conditional on the resources that you're interested in. All those things come together for a set of rules, and we try to settle on ones that minimize the conflict.
I've been interested lately in Hayek and his idea of the knowledge problem. I just found that interesting, how knowledge kind of resides in this bottom-up way where people who are right in the middle of the situation have the best information about how to make the decision or not. It reminds me a little bit of that kind of thing. Do you think there are, around these rules that you're discovering that and the emergent order like this, can that say something about maybe current models of economic policy say, around even things like inequality, climate, innovation, or anything like that?
Well, so the big issue in, the Great Society, the Open Society, however you want to describe it, is how is it that we coordinate the activities of all these different people who all know things about their local conditions and their local circumstances. And that's the problem that needs to be solved. How do we get this together so that the people who know what they're working on can communicate what they need to communicate to the other people in the system, in the society? And that's the problem we have to solve. And so some problems, if the benefits and the costs are local, that's when you really want to reside everything locally to let these people decide what to do. And so problems that are bigger then require some way of feeding up to that. And that's where the challenges come. So climate change is one of those, right? So polluting on one side of the world is still adding pollution to the entire planet. And so how do you do that coordinating? That it's not to say that there isn't a way to do this within a country, but even then you're going to, you have different interests, different states and how that works. But within a country, there are mechanisms that experimental economists have worked with in trying to understand how we can basically tie the costs to the people who actually generate it and then internalize that so they then adjust their output accordingly. And they're exciting things that people are coming up with. The problem with pollution is once it's out there, it's like, whose is it? But if they can find a way to tag it, then you know exactly how much is going out there. And you can create a mechanism saying, look, our targets in this geographic area are we're going to have this much pollution. Here, we're going to grandfather what you have been doing. And now that's your proportion of it. And now we're going to slowly shrink how much of that can be put out there. Now trade off amongst yourselves. Who gets to, so if you can discover new technologies that reduce your pollution, then you are going to benefit. And so it gives you the private incentive to look for those things when the total market for polluting. But it's necessarily, you have to do that tracking. And that's the hard part. That's why there's a problem in the first place.
And I guess people like Milton Friedman or Hayek would be pretty skeptical of even creating those systems in the first place, because they're probably going to be wrong and they're probably going to interfere with the natural way that the market can solve these problems in the first place.
Yes, but I think it's pretty well accepted that like a carbon tax is the way to think about how to do this. That if we can find a way that we can track and measure all of that's being generated, that we can find a way that we can reduce this. And you can make that revenue neutral in other senses and things like that too. But I mean, the alternative is, and this is largely though the way the world has gone, is this is a world in which you adapt. And we just got to find ways to adapt to the problem. And look, I mean, if you look at the data, the United States and Europe's, all of our emissions are going like this. And so, in fact, if I saw it correctly, we're back at levels that wouldn't have been thought of, 10, 15 years ago, how much pollution and carbon has been being added to the planet through the atmosphere. It's much lower than you might expect. But that's because we allow commerce to thrive and we became rich and we can come up with these technologies. If you're a poor country, I think there's the reasons to be concerned about saying, well, no, you don't get to do that. Because they will also find a way, if the richer they get, to also work on their emissions. So that's a particularly tough problem because it's a world problem, because it's a difficult problem to assign who is the one creating the costs and things like that. But but it doesn't mean there aren't going to be solutions to this.
Sure. In your previous book, The Property Species, you investigate the origins of the idea of property. And you argue that property is not a legal invention necessarily, but a moral and cognitive, perhaps like an evolutionary adaptation, and that it's kind of a crucial component of peaceful cohabitation. Can you explain a little bit about how our senses of yours and mine develop?
So the common language in the legal academy and in economics is we use talk about this notion of property rights, which implies that they are assigned by somebody and imposed on how people work. And that is the way it has to work in some sense at a political level. But it doesn't operate that way necessarily at the individual level and at an individual embedded in the community level. I mean, the government deciding what property rights isn't going to be the reason why a kid decides not to steal or to steal a bike. Like there's something else going on there than it is coming from our political level of our society that in how property works. And that's what I wanted to explore and to bring out, that any notion that we're looking at the political level has to have something starting down at the individual level and an individual level embedded in the community. And so where we learn those rules, and this is, every kid has to learn from their mentor the rules of when they can call something mine and not mine. Kids don't have to be taught to say mine when they grab something. They seem to do that all on their own. No one says, put some little toy in their hand, say mine, make this yours. And no, they do that. What they have to be taught is that's not yours.
Yeah.
That's somebody else can call that mine. And that is the essential part of property. It's putting the mine and the yours together and understanding that reciprocal situation that we live in every day. And I think that's also slightly missing when you talk about property rights. It's only about what you can do and maybe not do, but it's not really about jointly recognizing that other people can say about other things, this is mine. And to me, that's not yours. So I think it's got to start somehow in terms of the individual and the community. And those communities, are going to work together to create something political across them. But we don't spend enough time thinking about what it is at the ground level of an individual in their community and how these rules of property come about. So my book is about trying to understand where that might come from. Why is it that human beings are doing this? Can we kind of give some sense by looking at our primate cousins, chimpanzees and other ones? What kind of notions do they have? What kind of facilities they have? Think about mine and yours. And I've come to the conclusion that basically only human beings have this notion of property, of mine and yours. It might look like wolves, when they urinate and defend their territory, have property, but they don't actually say that's yours. They just say this is mine. Don't come here, we'll fight. The same is true about baboons and their harems and their females. Sure, they don't say that's yours. They're just saying don't go after mine. And so it's food, territory, and mates. You see, it looks like there's notions of property, but it's really only about excluding others from it, not about conveying a notion that there's something of yours to operate and do as you wish. And then the other difference is we do it with a whole bunch of stuff that isn't food, territory, and mates, like all these chattels, my movable things, animals and things like that. And so why is it that's the case? And so I wanted to pose the question that's not just excluding people. We're finding the set of things by which we can say that's not mine. And that is the hard question to figure out where that comes from. And I come down that is, unless you have this abstract notion of thought where you can think about connecting a person to a thing, and that this is a relationship that extends to the future, then you're not really going to get a notion of property off the ground. Here's why this is important to economics, because at its core, you're never going to get trade off the ground if you don't have this notion of mine and yours. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's also quite famous. Adam Smith recognized this. Matt Ridley talked about it in his book, The Rational Optimist. We're the only species that also trade one thing for another thing. So why is it that that's the case? Well, I would argue it's because we're the only ones who have a notion of mine and thine, of mine and yours. And so that becomes real important when we actually sit down to trade. We can say, this thing is not mine, it's yours. And then you say, this thing is not mine, it's yours about something else. And all we had to do was say those magic words, and now it's happened. But we have to have mine and yours to get the fact that we're moving and trading these two things between two people. And we do it simply by saying something. But our saying something changes how we see the world and our relationship between us. And so that's why property and trade are only found in human beings and no other animal. We got this way of just using our minds to envision the world being different than it is right now. I have possession of this thing and you have possession of something else, and now we're going to change it.
One of the things that fascinated me about the property ideas that you talk about is that it might be the case that without property, it's really hard to have peaceful cohabitation. I wonder if you could explore that idea a little bit.
So most people's notion of property is that you're like Yosemite Sam sitting on your porch saying, you're forcing me to use force if you come after my stuff. And so that somehow, if you're going to use this, the levers of government to enforce property so people aren't taking it, that property is necessarily tied to this notion of violence. Somebody gets to use violence at some point in time. And I don't think that's quite right. Because what property is at its core is that I'm respecting the custom that is mine and that is yours. And then some people are not respecting a custom, and that's when the notion of violence needs to be used. And so it's not in the custom of property itself, but in the violations of it. And those are two different things. Because the whole point of deciding that this is mine and that's yours, just like it is with the whalers, is that we're not fighting about it. And so one of the reasons why we come up with property is so that we're not fighting. And so I argue that peace is this final cause of why we have this notion of property. It means that we're not spending time defending our stuff, fighting people off, that we can be confident that this is mine and that's yours. So the violence is actually in the violation of the particular custom, and that's how you can differentiate it as being necessarily violent. It's necessary only to the extent that we are fallible human beings who sometimes can't control ourselves and want to take things from other people who claim them as their own.
And this can be seen across cultures and different types of government structures too, right?
Yeah, anthropologists, they're fairly robust finding, even in the middle of the 20th century, was that every human society has a set of things, either tools, utensils, or ornaments, about which somebody can say, this is mine and it's not yours. And so that can be a very small set of things, or it can be a very large set of things. So if you are a hunter-gatherer, obviously you don't have property in land because but you have them in your spears, you have them in your tools and your ornaments because you made them yourself. But they wouldn't have it in land because they don't need it for the way their society is organized. But as your society evolves and changes, you can take that same notion of mine and yours in things and kind of start expanding them into other things, which, Western societies have gone hog wild with this to the point where we have ideas and we call those mine and yours as well.
Yeah.
They don't even have boundaries. And we're like, but we can say we own it.
Yeah. Copyright that.
Yeah.
What does this say about political ideologies that are, say, hostile to private property?
So if you abolish the fact that people can claim things as their own, then everything is up for grabs. And in some sense, people are going to be trying to claim them, and they're going to be spending time and resources to enforce those if no one can actually exclude somebody, and more importantly, count on other people to exclude themselves from taking your stuff. And so the notion of property came about because over a very limited sense. You can think of tools like, I made this thing. In a way, I argue this is a part of me. And why would I make these things if other people just come and take them if they're not going to respect that? And so so I'm not going to invest my time if I don't think I'm confident that I can maintain this ownership and possession of something, and other people are going to do the same thing. And so property is important to generate common expectations over how our lives and how we use the resources around us, to the point of where the piece then allows us to do other things and spend our time on. So if you try to abolish that idea, first of all, you're not going to abolish the people in a way innate childless thing to grab stuff and claim it. That's not going to be abolished. And so people are still going to find ways to try to claim things. The problem is if they can't be enforced, then it becomes might makes right. Who can just take the stuff.
How does it relate to, the concept of high trust societies and low trust societies, and the ways in which trust is such a crucial part of prosperity and like a growing economy and a growing sophistication in society?
Well, it's a way of aligning people's expectations of what they can expect to happen, even when they can't anticipate all the different ways that you could be taken advantage of. And so the more we can not have to think about protecting ourselves against the capricious acting of person, the more we can spend our time in thinking about more productive things and more constructive ways of spending our time, more creative ways of spending our time. I mean, so what trust is a way of having aligned expectations about what we expect other people to basically not do to us more than what they will do for us.
Yeah.
And that, because if people are going to take advantage of us, they're going to find a way, they're going to do it. And if we can take those possibilities and make those as rare as possible, then that's going to allow us to do a whole lot other kind of things that we can't even anticipate.
I can relate to both like the economic experiments and this property idea too, because I've had my own business for 25 years and it's a small business. And so all of the deals that I do with people, even if I write them down, I have long-term relationships with clients for, like a decade or more. But I know that at any time, any of these people can just say, I'm not going to pay you. And there's not really anything I can do about it in that particular case. I'm not going to go to court over it. It's not going to be worth the time or effort and expense of taking someone to court. And so there's this huge trust thing that happens between me and my clients, and it goes both ways too. They trust me to meet my deadlines, and it's a very virtuous circle. Like I've never had someone not pay me in 25 years, and it's been a good experience. Like I've never had any issues that way, and so this really resonates with me. Some of these ideas, in a lot of ways too. The nature of owning my own business has forced me to kind of be a better person in a way, just because of the things that you're forced to understand about yourself, and like, oh yeah, I have to do this thing because I said I was going to do it, and if I don't do it, then it's down the road going to lead to them not trusting me again, and so I really have to like knuckle down and maybe like pull an all-nighter or something and finish this or whatever it is.
The really difficult question is, how do we get that off the ground?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Because if you don't have it, you just can't see how it's going to come around. And if you do have it, you're like, how are we keeping this? Why is it not subject to kind of a decay? Those are important questions and big ones that I don't think we quite really know the answer to.
And there've been moments in history too where, with political turmoil or maybe some like transfer over from one system of communism or to capitalism, vice versa, where some of that stuff does break down, and there is a lot of corruption and things like that. So I know that there are case studies, I'm sure that they're out there. I don't know if you've looked at those, but
yeah, there does seem to be something about, I think that the word now being bandied around is abundance or prosperity, that kind of breeds more peace and prosperity because we can afford not to have to take things and like that. But it's not clear like how you get those basic set of respect rules for dealing with each other off the ground so that some society can do it. The easiest way seems to be you import the people who don't have it to the ones who do have it, and then they can adapt to the new world and it grows, because it's easier to adapt to a custom already in pace than it is to create a brand new one.
Yeah, yeah. And that's sort of why like a lot of this nation building stuff that the America's tried to do in the past just has failed miserably, right?
Yeah, the easier thing would be bring them here, but we're not really in the mood of doing that either.
Yeah, yeah. But you also might run the risk of there might be a tipping point in which if that trust does break down, if there's too many people who don't agree to your basic principles of fairness and things like that, then it could break down.
Yes. And those are, yeah. So where that is, how that works, that's, those are not easy questions to answer.
No, but they're pretty interesting and they're kind of relevant to a lot of the current stuff that's going on right now, right? In the Anglosphere, particularly, like I know in the UK, they've got immigration issues and I guess you guys do too, a little bit less so now that Trump's in, I suppose. But
yeah.
Maybe we'll move on now. I know that you've taken a similar approach as you did to property, but to other parts of important aspects of economy, which is trade and specialization. Can you talk a bit about why it's important to look at trade and specialization in the same way that you did property?
Well, there's a fundamental question that the way we talk about and introduce economics that I think just doesn't work for the person who's an already economically minded. And that is we start with saying the problem in the world, the problem which economics is about to solve is that we want more stuff than the world can provide us. And so scarcity is this problem that needs to be overcome. And then we look outside the window and we say, look how rich we are right now compared to where humanity natural condition is, prior to the last 250 years. And we're like, look, it's exponentially growing. Like, how do you put those two things together? You're telling you it's all about scarcity and but that exponential growth of world GDP per capita looks pretty not constrained. What's going on here? And so scarcity necessarily puts us in this mindset of it's so much stuff to be moved around, and that's kind of what we got to solve. Not about what it is that actual people need to do in order to create, a better life for themselves. And so what I notice is that we don't actually explain why the basic principle of trade, which is the foundation of economics, I would say Adam Smith saw that as the primary axiom for explaining the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, that is the really small way which just me trading this for that with you makes us a little bit better off, that in itself is moral, because we could have been, as we've been talking about, fighting with each other, trying to take it from each other. So I have all of it or you have all of it. But no, we do something much more limited. We just make ourselves slightly better off by having ourselves exchange these things. And that's moral at its core, that I'm doing something for you and you're doing something for me, as opposed to thinking it's scarcity and everyone's acting in their own self-interest in order to get the most they can for themselves. And now we just kind of figure out the rules by which people do that. And so I think it's important that we think the starting point is a moral act of trading things and not stealing things or not fighting for things. And that's where we need to start with that premise. And you understand, as kind of talked about before, that property is inherently a part of that conversation, because you got to have that piece before you're actually doing the trading, and property gives you that piece. But as Adam Smith recognized, just trading things here and there, those are going to be small things. That's not really where the gains come from. In Adam Smith's time, he's living at the time when the world's starting to change. We're seeing that UK is being this place of growth relative to the rest of the world. And it's like, well, what's causing that? Well, we can divide our labor. We can specialize what we're doing. So he concentrated on the fact that, my task, we just divide the tasks to create this one thing down to individual people doing certain parts of the component. But another version of that is not also just spending time going into a particular profession, a particular line of work, in specializing in that way. So it's not just a division of labor. That we do that, we can create more stuff. And the only reason we're going to create the more stuff is not because I want it all for myself. It's because other people will exchange me for things. But that involves us already living together. And so in order to have this kind of specialization, division of labor, we already have to be community minded to want to be sitting and organizing ourselves as a town or a community such that different people are doing different things. And then we transport the stuff around. And if we can extend that to broader and broader geographical areas so we can ship the stuff around, then we can do even more specialization and get things. And so, but you have to live together. You have to have these communities, and that's another moral aspect, that we have to want to be in the company of other people in order to take advantage of the division of labor, all the gains that can come from trading stuff and specializing. And so the general kind of introduction to this in economics doesn't start with that very human aspect of how we live as a species. It doesn't start with the very moral aspect that we are interested in doing things for others, because this is very different than any other animal. So, chimpanzees are very closely related to us. Some say somewhere around like 95, 97% same DNA, but generally chimpanzees are out for themselves. Sure, they'll help their young out. They'll work together to, depose things, but when they go hunting, it's every chimpanzee for themselves. And so there isn't a notion of in this together doing something for you. There's no joint goal that is for the benefit of both of us. It's just happened to be coordinated in time and space, but not doing it with the notion of doing it for somebody else, and jointly so.
That idea that there's a moral component to markets and trade, it really resonates with me in my own experience, and also from just looking around at the wider society that we live in. But it seems like there's a lot of people out there who are really skeptical of markets and don't see that moral aspect of markets, which ends up making them a lot more sympathetic to, say, something like socialism or something along those lines. What do you think is going on there?
Well, it's difficult to see the moral in the familiar. If you're just used to having everyone follow through on their word and you get what you want when you're trading things, it's hard to see that they had a choice to do that. That they did that. They did that because they wanted to do the right thing and follow through on their word, or deliver their product or service as they said they would do it. And at the quality that you expect. They're not trying to fraudulently slip something else in there and change. And so it's hard to see that all these little things in every part of our daily lives, that kind of high trust that you're talking about, is all around us. And what we tend to focus on are those really bad examples out there of people taking advantage of situations, and they are there. And, in a sense, being especially alert for those is good, because we want to be able to identify them and to inoculate ourselves from them.
Yeah.
But if we get preoccupied by that and not really see the whole picture, that we're actually, creating a civil society by engaging in commerce, that we will then kind of lose that commerce and that civil society if we don't take care to recognize that it's there in the first place.
Both Hayek and Friedman talked a lot about the relationship between, freedom, liberty, and free markets, and the way that they're kind of mutually supportive of each other. Can you talk a bit about their ideas on that, or yours for that matter?
Well, so the greatest thing about human beings is our ability to create with new ideas, but that's only going to be beneficial if I can actually do something with that. I just can actually come up with it. So to be creative, you have to be free to think about things, free to do things differently, free to do things that put me in competition with somebody already doing something related.
Yeah.
And so that notion of freedom kind of is tied to being creative. And so you can't have those two things kind of separate, and you need property in that sense, that this piece that we've talked about, that you need to be able to then to be able to use that freedom, you have to be willing, not have to worry about defending yourselves against something. So freedom, prosperity, creativity, it's all kind of one part of that, as you put it, this virtuous circle. They all make each other strengthen each other, and they're also sometimes hard to see. And so we got to be, in a way, defending that freedom. I think Hayek puts it, can never be about expediency. It has to be about a principle, because it'll have to apply very broadly, even when I think, expediency demands something else. That no, I got to trust in this notion that freedom, along with property and along with our creativity, is going to actually do more and better things for more people.
Yeah. It's hard to, I guess, trust the invisible hand because it's invisible, right? Basically.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to see what it be lost, and then when it is lost, there have been many examples in history that it's not clear that it's attributed to a loss of freedom that caused the problem.
Yeah.
And that's it's hard to see. The absence of coercion, it means an absence. And so that's really difficult to appreciate when only the observable is what you see.
Yeah, and that's what I really love about your work, and why I wanted to have you on the show. It's really important for people to hear about these ideas about the moral side of the market too. I know back in I guess it was like the 70s and 80s, or maybe I think it was around the 70s and 80s when Milton Friedman did that whole Free to Choose TV series, documentary series, which is like a 10-hour thing, which was on, mainstream TV, communicating the value of free markets and selling the idea more broadly, both to the general public, but also probably like policymakers and stuff as well. It seems like we need more people like that doing that kind of work.
Milton Friedman had the preternatural gift to be able to say something so succinctly in just 1 and 2 sentences, and with a smile at the same time, that is so important for persuasion. His gift is, we don't see his gift in action as much as we should.
Yeah, are economists doing enough right now to educate the policymakers and the general public?
Well, in a way, Milton Friedman was about first principles about how commerce works. And economics has become very much interested in the fine details of things. And so it becomes very difficult for us to communicate to the average person about what is important about what we're doing, because we haven't really thought it through coherently about what our first principles are.
Okay.
And he was thinking about very big picture things, and then knew how to take the concrete examples that his viewers recognize and put them into an example of these big principles at work.
Mm-hmm.
I think we tend to be a little more concerned about our technical aspects than kind of the deeper philosophical principles of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I want to get back, is that think through those principles. In writing the book, I was kind of forced to do that because I hadn't done that, well, really since I started my career as an economist. I just kind of took the way we were taught and kind of went with it, and not question, like, where would I want to start if I'm thinking where economics is to begin? And somehow morality has to be in that starting point.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, especially right now with all these different strains of criticism of Western civilization that are going on, postmodernism, critical theories of various sorts, cultural Marxism, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of people out there kind of working at whittling away at the achievements of the West, I guess. I don't know if you see it in those terms.
So modern social science, maybe this is what you had in mind, but modern social science largely is about trying to find differences among people.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say men are different from women. Americans are different than Japanese. Trump voters are different than Hillary Clinton voters and things like that. And then we run our experiments and we find our statistical tests and, p-value is less than 0.05. There's a difference between group A and group B.
Yeah.
And what we aren't spending much time on is all the things that we have in common. And so I understand the need to I think diversity and perspectives are very important. And actually, as we talked about earlier, about how understanding your local circumstances, you know that better than other people. And so that's the big problem that needs to be solved, is how do we can combine all those local circumstances for something bigger than any one of our minds can understand. But there's also something very common to all of us that makes this entire whole system of commerce work. And that we have probably more in common than we have that makes us different.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we spend too much time trying to make ourselves different than seeing what we have in common with people. I think that applies to a lot of debates. Like, we're not, immigration debate is not finding what we have in common with the people who are trying to immigrate here.
Yeah.
It's a notion of difference. And so something about common humanity is important, and I think lost in our modern discourse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see us trying to appeal to that. We're trying to appeal to a tribe more than across the tribe to something bigger than our tribes.
And there's sort of like a lot of criticism right now against the liberal project, generally speaking,
Yeah.
right? From a lot of these different groups. Whereas I think it's actually a pretty great project, and like the achievement of the West in that respect is pretty amazing.
Well, it's amazing how we are free to craft our own identities in a way that just wasn't possible 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so there can be these common links within which I can be different and express myself. But if it's only about our differences, then we're not going to be able. Then we're going to fight over whose differences can be made legitimate, as opposed to what we have in common.
Mm-hmm. That's why I think the work you're doing is so important. And I think more of that first principles stuff, finding the moral foundations for a lot of the stuff we take for granted, is so crucial to countering some of these other narratives that are going on right now.
I agree, and I thank you for those kind words. That somebody who is in the real world doing business and not sitting in an ivory tower recognizes those things is the greatest compliment an economist could get.
One more question I want to ask you about is the Canadian context. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Canadian context much.
Well, I traveled to New Brunswick for the first time last March to go to Mount Allison University. So I loved it. It was a fantastic trip, and got to spend some time in Toronto and Montreal before and after it. So I was there when your most recent election was called. Got to talk to people about it, but
yeah. So the context is that in Canada, the size of our government, like, the number of employees working for a government has increased like by 40% in 10 years. All kinds of other measures where you look at government spending and the ways in which government are starting to, put their fingers into the market in a variety of ways. That seems to be the trend that is going on in Canada, and people seem to like it. They voted for Carney recently, who is a kind of globalist type who, talks about big federal projects and things like that. Do you have any opinions on that's happening all over the West, not just Canada, like it's UK, and I think the States too has grown in government immensely. What are your thoughts on that whole process over the last, say, 50 years?
Well, if you are thinking you're going to be able to constrain this thing from growing, you're going to be disappointed. I've been hoping all my life that there's going to be a way to kind of maybe slow this down. but there isn't. I think the best you can hope for is that you still have the freedoms and the protections in there to pursue what your projects and the way you want to pursue them, that you can grow faster than that really takes over.
Okay.
And so you have to have that open economy. I think, is it Deirdre McCloskey calls it the permissionless society kind of thing. You more permission to do things and make those permissions more equal in society, but that basically creativity and growth can just kind of keep pace with the way the government is kind of growing. But
Wow.
I just don't think it's going to like. Look, we had some people come into government with the Trump's new administration with this Doge thing, and like they're just going to take a cut to, and like they weren't doing this in any thoughtful way that actually would be there for the long run. And so, if anything, that's probably set back how we're going to be able to, because it was just done so poorly.
Yeah.
It wasn't done thoughtfully. It wasn't done in a principled way. It was done abruptly. And so even when you think you have the right people that could do this, it hasn't been done right or well. So I'm pessimistic on that.
I would say so. Yes.
I'm optimistic about what the regular person can do outside of that to create benefits for the rest of the society and in the world.
Interesting. So what's the role of economists in shifting the attitudes towards that? I know that in the Reagan years and the Thatcher years, I was pretty young at the time. I don't really remember much from that time, but I don't know how well they succeeded at it, but that was part of their aim, was to kind of reduce the state a bit and shift things around.
I think, I don't know UK example well, but I think the most important thing that Thatcher did was denationalize stuff to make things more private that weren't private before. And Reagan had some of the biggest budgets of all time and deficits of spending of all time at the time in the 80s. They make ones today look quaint. Even they make it look quaint on a per capita level. That's what's just kind of disturbing.
Okay.
But it's never, I think they had a philosophy that kept it from going faster than it might have otherwise. But
okay, interesting. So yeah, it's something that's just really I'm really concerned about, and I feel like I want you to give me the answer, but
I don't have the answer. I just think we still keep finding ways of productivity that just make the world use fewer resources to make more stuff, and we are still finding many different ways to do that. And I don't see that slowing down as long as we don't, really clamp down on the notions of property and freedom that make that possible.
And I guess a lot of people, like, especially if you're on the right of the spectrum, there's a lot of people like saying that that's where we're going, which is to clamp down on those freedoms. And
yes, the question is it happening on the margin, or is it happening at a very broad core level? And I'm not sure that it's only just happening on margins.
What do you mean by broad core level?
Like that we're really not allowing people to, create new businesses. Like it's just it's just not possible to do these kind of things anymore.
Yeah, they're still possible. Yeah.
It's possible. You're not discouraged from this. It's not going to be expropriated. If we're starting to literally expropriate stuff, then we have a serious problem.
Okay.
We're just making it just much harder to get something started. There was an old metric about when they're looking at development, how long does it take to put in a phone line? And if that took years, well, you're not going to be able to create a business if it's going to take that long. So we have a lot of those things that slow things down on the margin, but things are still getting built. New things are being created.
Except for housing.
But even that shit, like the city of Austin, it's not getting enough kind of discussion about how their populations are growing and rents and housing is falling because they just had a big boom in building.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
people aren't just willing to go that far to let it happen, but you finally have a great data point in it going in the right direction because they just made it more possible to build a lot. Some might say probably built too much, but that's only to our benefit if you're a consumer of housing.
Yeah. So interesting. So so it was like a regulation thing getting in the way of new builds mainly.
Yeah, they made it easier to build, and people built large. It was a real problem. I wasn't there personally. I've only read about it, but congestion was a real problem and things like this, and probably still is. But they're able to get more big buildings of housing construction projects to the finish line in a pretty short amount of time. In order to kind of turn that around. It's just a matter of willingness, but there are examples, and there's a reason why businesses are flocking to the South, because there are opportunities there. And so as long as we have that, and the federalist system kind of makes it, gives different states an incentive to be those, to try those experiments out, I'm pretty optimistic on that.
Okay. Yeah. Like America's kind of has some advantages that way that other countries don't have. Like, I don't think Canada's quite as dynamic, and we don't have the same kind of options, I don't think. But a fellow economist is running Argentina right now. Oh, and he's trying to reduce the size of government.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes. And it just, I don't think people expected him to win, if I recall correctly. And so his success will, again, maybe lead to some more examples, but things had to get really bad before they gave him a shot.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part, that really before we're going to try these things out that kind of can make us better off, things have to get really bad. But we'll see. I'm rooting for him. I don't know all the details of what he's doing down there, but he did something right off the bat to make housing a lot more tradable, and it had an effect as well.
Okay, yeah. I know that the inflation's come down, but I didn't want to get into the weeds of that, but I just kind of wanted to get your initial impression of that.
He certainly adheres to the Hayek's principles. He likes to quote him quite regularly, Hayek, and I think Mises too, I think.
Yeah, Mises, yeah. He's into that stuff. He calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, I guess, which I don't understand what he's saying when he says that.
Yeah. He as president of a country, he's an anarcho-capitalist. Okay.
But where do we go from here? What are things that you're hopeful about in the future, looking forward as you investigate human prosperity? Well,
I'm hopeful because I think the new generation of students learning economics want something more out of their economics. They are looking for the moral and the social in their economics. And so if they want it, we're going to have to give it to them, or they're going to go elsewhere. And so I'm optimistic in that sense that the students themselves are going to look for and ask of us what we do need going forward in the study of economics.
That's interesting.
And so I think these ideas come to me from listening to my students, where they're coming from, the pushback on how I would traditionally think about things, and then try seriously taking that seriously to kind of rethink through how I would present what economics is about. And the students want that, and I think that's a good thing. The question is whether or not we're going to hear them and respond with what they are looking for.
Mm-hmm. And if people want to find out more about you and your work and your books, where can they go?
I'm at bartjwilson.com as my website. You can just type Bart Wilson into Google and Bart Wilson Economics, and I'll pop up on Twitter here or my website.
Sure. And you're also head of the Smith Institute.
Smith Institute for Political Economy and Philosophy.
Yeah. Which seems to be like quite the opposite end of what your normal work is, much more focused on sort of like the basics about economics, but the political economy seems to be the opposite end of things.
Well, it's when you appreciate philosophy and literature that you can see how you can put the social and the moral into economics. And so without them, I would not be able to think through any of these kind of questions. My English colleagues and my philosophy colleagues are very important for helping me think through these things.
Interesting. And where can they go to find out more about the Smith Institute?
The website's really long, but if you type in Smith Institute, Chapman University, it should pop up right up in Google.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I'm really excited to have found your work because I'm going through this phase where I'm finding out all about all these amazing economists like Hayek and things like that. But it's nice to see someone doing stuff on first principles nowadays too. That's amazing. So thanks for coming on, talking about it.
Thank you for having me. It is a joy to hear somebody not in the academy find the ideas and find something useful in them. So it's been my pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Viewpoints. Thanks for listening. If you like viewpoint diversity and you want to hear more like this, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more, visit viewpointspodcast.ca. And if you have ideas for topics or guests, we'd love to hear from you. You can connect using the contact form on the website, or you can send me an email directly at sean@viewpointspodcast.ca.